They have adapted themselves to nature, environment, the people in all regions they have settled in a short time throughout history. They opposed only to wars and slaughter in accordance with their belief. Doukhobors were the spirit wrestlers, deeply committed to the god and philanthropy. Srootskaya campus decorated with flowers and trees in the village of Gorolevka in Georgia. It was built in 1870s. It was a center of leadership for Doukhobor community. It is a museum under protection nowadays, full of memories, a serenity still telling ancient stories, whispering Doukhobor prayers.
года, 18 августа.
Important crossroads experienced by Doukhobors in 1800s were underlined on the inscription put into its garden in the early 1900s. It started saying, "Fair relatives of the mentioned Doukhobor surrender to God and the Tsar who gathered us in Sütlü Sular Vadisi, Milky Waters Valley in 1801, and the Holy Spirit who protect the volunteers of the truth," and continued, emphasizing the outlines of the story we are going to tell. They, Doukhobors, were an important community of a larger belief family with typical rules resembling each other in various perspectives. They were faithful, tolerant, respectful, humble and skillful Russian peasants with superior qualities, understanding earth, trees, flowers, fruit and craft and the modern technique of their times. In those old-time circumstances, life and earth were really hard, but they would not live different from others. They were like a tired wind parched with the storms, but they would always hold their heads high. In the upper class, Tsar, government and rich aristocrat clamates, an oppressive and ruthless vanity reigned. Around the government and the traditional church circles, notability and golden color were common. While the people lived in great privation, the richness of certain circles was dazzling. Days filled with ceremonies, dance, and music. The most important thing to which Doukhobors and the people who thought like them opposed from the point of their belief was entrenched hard structure of traditional Russian Orthodox Church and its strict rules far from understanding or embracing human. According to Doukhobors, the God was not in temples, icons or some symbols, but he lived in a man and his soul. Man should love God with all his heart, mind, and soul. He was a temple committed to the God, an extraordinary blessing, a holy treasure. Common prayers were a part of their happiness in everywhere and every time they came together. The most beautiful flavor in a celebration feast was to be able to feel peace and being human. They would leave a loaf of bread, some salt, and water in their houses they left behind while immigrating all the time, not to leave those who came to their houses after them hungry.
Сияют божественным светом любви. Благодарю Тебя, Боже, за то, что Гореловка и Духоборье сияют божественным светом любви.
Man could stay alone with God whenever he desired. Doukhobor mentality was always stood by philanthropy.
За то, что Гореловка и Духоборье сияют божественным светом любви.
But wars have so much infiltrated into the life. Doukhobors believed that wars and slaughter were one of the greatest sins. Sixth commandment in the Holy Bible, "You shall not kill, you shall not murder," was a clear message for opposition to soldiership and violence. That was the golden rule. If you love your neighbor as much as yourself, how can you kill him or how can you harm him? They always opposed to and resisted slaughter, wars, being a soldier or serving these aims. As they were known to be like that, tyrant oppression of church and state would always fall on them, especially in 1719s. Even their names were the products of that era. In 1785, the Archbishop of Orthodox Church called them Dukhoborski in order to identify them as sinners. In other words, spirit wrestlers. The priests tried to insult them. However, Doukhobors did not push that name aside, but they contributed their own interpretation to it. We are spirit wrestlers because we wrestle with the God's spirit and for Him. They expressed that they would use divine power of love while struggling for a better and humanly life. At the beginning of 1800s, Doukhobors were faced with annihilation. But one of those hard days, the hand of the fate would stretch just in time. On 25 January 1802, Tsar First Alexander, who began to rule the country with constitutional monarchy and sympathized Doukhobors, granted an amnesty to those persecuted people and gave 40 hectares of land for each family in the fantastic region known as Milky Waters in Tavria, just in the north of Black Sea. Their taxes were reduced and some exceptions were brought for their compulsory military service. A bread for Doukhobor, a drop of water, bread, and a little freedom. They could come together for the first time and unite as a community that deal everything in common. Those days, of course, would not be forgotten. Doukhobor was filled with winds blowing from Black Sea, abundance, and fantasy. However, when Tsar Alexander I died in 1825, his brother Nicola I, who was a harsh leader in all areas, took his place. New Tsar Nicola was deeply bound to Russian Pan-Slavism and nationalism. And of course, he was bound to soldiership, war, and slaughter as well. Midwinter would fall on hearts early. In 1840, Tsarist published an ultimatum. Doukhobors had to turn back to administration and church, including military services, or they would be exiled to the mountainous regions of Transcaucasia under merciless circumstances. Great majority of Doukhobors considered keeping their faith, and between 1841 and 1845 accepted to be exiled from Tavria, their heaven on earth. Cruelty and despair of forced migration came back. New regions were weighed down with great difficulties. Caucasia was full of mountains, wild nature circumstances, and some really brutal people in that period. But Doukhobors were extraordinarily strong with their idocratic philosophy and their belief, conscientiousness against every kind of difficulty. They were located in the lands of present-day Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, Gorolevka region primarily. Doukhobors were the spirit restless, deeply committed to philanthropy. They were helpful new neighbors, full of love and knowledge and goodwill, not useless nomads. They had their foundations in Christianity, but they respected deeply to every human and every belief. They would adapt to nature, environment, all the people in the new regions they had settled in very short time. They built clean houses in the world of exile, and they decorated their houses with flowers, relieving hearts. Their belief and opinion leaders, whom they still remember with respect and brought them to this region, Vasily Kalmykov was their leader. They built his house in Trotskaya in a garden ornamented with flowers and trees full of their hearts, a decorous and elegant house among greens but far from being luxurious. A slender tall building just nearby, where common prayers performed and guests received. Basetka. All the houses were common